Welcome to NASDAQ Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at NASDAQ. Joining us at the MarketSite studio in Times Square, New York City, Hubert Danso is back with us. He's a chairman and CEO of Africa Investor Group. Hubert, it is great to have you back. It's been a number of years that we've had you at MarketSite, and of course you're in town for Climate Week in New York City. Tell us about what's happening with green tech investments in Africa.
Well, green tech investments in Africa, I mean, it's really about the overall new narrative around Africa's investment opportunity. And as we know, we're in an industrial revolution now, which is driven by natural capital. So in terms of the green transition in Africa, we've got like $3 trillion worth of projects called nationally determined projects that are about to be, involved and opened up to the private sector and the investment community. So we as the long-term institutional investment community are extremely excited about, there's a changing narrative here, Jill, right? When you're at COP26 and you heard about all this finance sitting on the sidelines, it didn't really talk about the long-term institutional investors, which is my constituency, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, insurance companies. So we're now seeing a bigger shift about, for this transition to happen, for these sort of $3 trillion worth of projects to happen, for Africa's $4.8 trillion of carbon credit headroom between now and 2030 to be securitized and the value unlocked, it needs long-term equity, long-term capital. So for us, our narrative, even before a lot of these statistics, which is really our sort of gut feel and the general data, was simply saying that, climate change, the transition is one of the best investment opportunities of our time. And now we're beginning to actually see a lot of change between the relationships, right? The relationships used to be between development finance institutions and governments. Now the real mantra across the continent is institutional investor, public partnerships. So, us as owners of large pools of capital, private capital, and governments as owners of large programs of infrastructure, we're really coming together and doing some very exciting things.
It is really interesting what's happening in Africa. You have a growing middle class, you have a young population. FinTech is really making headways there, green investing. I mean, these infrastructure projects is what's going to continue to fuel that middle class, because that requires skill sets, it requires education. These are good paying jobs. And I think, over the next couple of decades, you're really going to start to see a leadership shift in that area.
Absolutely, and I think that's why if you bring long-term capital, we can really invest on a 50 to 100-year basis, really, and start beginning to look at those bigger, broader horizons. And we all know that Africa is going to have 50% of the world's youth by the end of this century. Now, if you just marry that also with the fact that the continent has so much opportunity in terms of green hydrogen to begin to sell into the rest of the world, some of these old classical risks that used to be a challenge like currency risk, well, if you're investing in foreign currency in a massive green hydrogen installation and infrastructure project in the continent, and you're investing in foreign currency and your offtake is in Europe or elsewhere in foreign currency, you can begin to see all of the enfranchisement of economic opportunity and upliftment. So you've got, 50% of the world's youth, you've got, and then you imagine if upper class, middle class, economic potential starts really filtering up. Africa is going to be a very serious geopolitical and economic player in the rest of the world. And that is what pension fund investors, sovereign wealth fund investors, if you look just at the resources when we talk about green technologies, there's already a shortage. Only 50% of the African continent has been geologically tested. Now, all of the survey results suggest that Africa has at least as much unknown resources that it already has that are proven. So that means that we're going to be a massive player in the battery metals, all of the critical minerals that are required for the turbines, so all of these technologies selling into a $10 trillion and growing global green industrial economy. And that is how we're going to start adding value. Because as you know, we've just launched last year the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is one of the largest, in fact it is the largest by number of countries, free trade area since the establishment of the World Trade Organization. So when you begin to see how you can leverage that, and you start adding value to your goods and getting access to a $10 trillion and growing market, I mean, it's really interesting times.
It is. It's almost hard to imagine just the scope of it, because, I mean, the numbers start adding up when you think about 50% of the world's population, the youth is going to be focused there, trillions of dollars worth of projects. And as that exponentially multiplies as you go through the years, it really is interesting to follow. However, I do want to ask you about geopolitics. You brought that up. How do you manage the geopolitical risk?
The geopolitical risk, I think, really is when you begin to look